The plates were too big for the table, but I kept placing them anyway, one at each seat, careful, symmetrical, like it meant something. Forks perfectly parallel to knives. Napkins folded, candles spaced evenly. I had learned how to do it from a book Aunt Camille gave me, not from anyone who should have shown me. This was the third birthday I set this table by myself, but this time felt different. Heavier. Like even the air knew no one was coming. The rain pattered on the windows, not hard, not soft, just steady, like the world outside was humming a lullaby to no one in particular. I placed the last candle in the center of the cake, then stepped back and stared at it. Behind me, Camille stood in the hallway, arms folded, expression unreadable. She always watched birthdays like this, like she wanted to say something but didn't have the right to. I checked the clock. 3 p.m. No knock. No car in the driveway. No excuse I hadn't already recycled in my mind. Maybe traffic, I whispered. Then I laughed, sharp and bitter, like my own voice surprised me. Have you ever celebrated something, knowing deep down no one would show up? The mail slot clinked. I ran, barefoot, reckless, toward the door. My fingers fumbled with the envelope, tearing at it with the kind of hope you only get when you're still young enough to believe in things. A card. The kind you find in the discount rack at the grocery store. Shiny balloon print, glitter already flaking off. Inside, be good, sweetheart, Mom and Dad. That was it. I read it out loud like it mattered, like someone needed to hear it. Then I placed it gently, right on top of the cake. Like it was a gift. Like it was enough. The candles flickered as I leaned closer. You don't even know how old I am now, do you? I said to no one. The words cracked like cold glass. Camille walked in quietly. She didn't speak. Just placed her hand on my shoulder, soft, steady. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. The longing inside me twisted, then snapped. Sarcasm filled the hollow space it left behind. I grabbed the cake and bolted. Out the door, into the rain, down the steps. The cold hit like a slap, but I didn't stop. Neighbors stared through fogged-up windows. One called out, "Leora?" I ignored them all. Halfway down the sidewalk, I set the cake down. Right there on the concrete. My bare knees soaked through my jeans as I knelt beside it. "Mom!" I screamed into the storm. Then again. Louder. "Mom!" The words vanished in the wind, swallowed by clouds that didn't care. The cake slumped. Rain smeared the icing, candles drooped. A sugary grave. I kept yelling until my voice cracked. Until all that was left was the sound of rain and the dull roar inside my chest. Camille appeared with an umbrella, her face pale, panic barely veiled. She didn't yell. Didn't scold. Just pulled me up and held me close, shielding me with something more than fabric. That kind of hurt, the silent, polite abandonment, isn't loud. It just stays forever. Have you ever felt that? Back inside, wrapped in a towel, I sat at the kitchen table. My fingers trembled, but I wasn't crying. Crying felt too small for the ache. Camille handed me a mug. Real hot cocoa, whipped cream melting into tiny rivers. She always made it from scratch, never from a packet. She didn't say anything. Just waited. "Are you going to leave, too?" I asked, not looking at her. She hung her coat next to mine. Same hook. No words. That said more than any promise ever could. Right then, something shifted. If no one's going to fight for me, I'll do it myself, I thought, not in anger, but in decision. Like choosing what shoes to wear. Later, I opened the tin box. The one labeled truths. I placed the soggy birthday card inside, letting it fold at the corners. On a slip of paper, I wrote, 10. Alone. Again. I sealed the lid. Truths deserved their own space. And that was the first time I stopped waiting. The first time I started watching. Behind me, Camille opened the oven. The smell of something baking crept into the air, warm, sweet, alive. And somewhere between sugar and silence, I decided birthdays didn't have to be graves. Not forever. The first time I pressed butter into flour, my hands were too warm. Aunt Camille said that's why the crust turned tough. You can't rush good things, she told me, cutting chilled cubes of butter like she was performing surgery. Balance, baby. In baking and in life. At 11, I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. She watched as I clumsily stirred too fast and added too much salt. The dough refused to come together, and I smacked the wooden spoon down, frustrated. Camille just smiled and slid the bowl back toward me. If you add too much of one thing, everything falls apart. It's not just baking, honey. It's people too. That day, with flour streaked on my cheek and butter under my nails, I realized that baking wasn't just about dessert. It was about noticing. About knowing when you've gone too far, and having the patience to fix it before it's ruined. Did someone ever teach you life through the little things? Through what seemed like nothing at all? Camille didn't just live in the kitchen. She had a world outside, one I rarely saw until she brought me there. Charleston County Courthouse looked like something out of a storybook to me. Massive stone steps. Heavy wooden doors. Ceilings so high they made you whisper without knowing why. This is my niece, she told the front desk guard. But she's more like my shadow. I stayed close. Everyone moved with purpose. Lawyers brushed past with briefcases. Judges floated by in long black robes, as if they weren't even touching the ground. I'd never seen adults this serious unless someone had died. Camille guided me to the back row of a courtroom. Just watch. Quietly. A case was in session. A woman stood at the front, hands clenched, a lawyer at her side. Next to her, a small boy, maybe 5, sat still. Too still. That woman used her child to steal government funds, Camille whispered. He's the one paying for it. I looked at the boy. His face didn't move. Not even when his name was called. I knew that silence. I wore that same mask once. I wasn't the only one with scars. I just learned to cover mine with frosting. The judge's voice echoed like thunder. I hereby place the child in temporary care until further review. The woman screamed. The boy didn't. I flinched. Camille leaned down. Justice isn't warm. It's right. I didn't know how to feel about that. On our way out, she stopped in the hall and pointed at a statue. Lady Justice. Scales in one hand. A sword in the other. A blindfold over her eyes. No eyes. No ears. No heart, Camille said. Only hands, one for truth, one for judgment. I stared at the scales, then pulled out my notebook and sketched quickly. I added a small heart at the tip of one side. Just enough to tilt it. I thought justice could use a little compassion. And for the first time, I wondered, what if truth and judgment weren't always on the same side? At home, Camille turned arguments into courtroom games. You want the last cookie? Defend your case. She made me stand. Present facts. Cross-examine. Appeal to fairness. And if I whined? I lost. She once recorded me on her old phone and played it back. Listen to how clear you sound. That's a mind meant for more. We made a game of it. The justice jar. If one of us made a solid argument, we dropped in a coin. When the jar was full, we'd buy something sweet. I won most days, not because I shouted, but because I learned to listen first. Camille said the best lawyers didn't speak first. They noticed what others missed. Ever been told you had a gift before you even knew it? What did you do with that voice? One night, the whole house smelled like apples and cinnamon. Camille pulled her famous cobbler from the oven, set 2 spoons on the table, and gave me the first scoop. Just as tonight, she said. No distractions. Just butter, sugar, and truth. While we ate, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, if something ever happens to me, remember, you don't owe anyone your silence. I didn't know what she meant. But I nodded. She got up, wrote something on a yellow sticky note, and stuck it on the fridge. Truth is patient. That night, the fridge light was the only glow in the room. I tiptoed back in, lifted the lid, and stole one more spoonful of cobbler. I didn't know then that promises can rise just like dough, if you give them time. The house was too quiet. School let out early that day. Thanksgiving week always did that, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt something missing. Not just sound. Weight. Camille's chair by the window sat empty, her knitted shawl draped over one arm like it had given up waiting for her shoulders. The oak tree outside cast long fingers of shadow across the living room floor. I could almost hear the laughter that used to fill the corners, smell the apple cobbler baking. Instead, I smelled dust. I dropped my backpack by the door. A memory hit of the birthday I'd spent waiting, setting out forks like prayers. Camille had been late that day. She said traffic. Now I wondered if she just needed a minute to cry alone. In her study, a small stack of unopened envelopes caught my eye. My name, Leora Vance, scrawled in looping script. I picked one up. The postmark was 2 years old. Why didn't Mom or Dad send these? I whispered. My voice felt foreign in the silence. I called Camille's number. The voicemail still worked. Hey sweetheart, her voice said, gentle, warm. I'll call you back, but she wouldn't. Have you ever walked into a home and felt the absence louder than any sound? The tribute dinner was held 2 days later. Mom arrived first, in a navy suit so stiff it looked like it had never been sat in. Dad didn't say a word, just nodded like he was trying not to breathe. Celine didn't show, no surprise. Dustin came in her place, wearing her perfume on his coat like an apology. The long table was full. But it felt staged, like a courtroom with no judge. A vase of lilies sat where Camille should have been. Mom raised her glass. To family unity, she said, and cameras outside the window flashed. I suddenly understood why her eyeliner was waterproof. I stared at the empty seat across from me and thought, they're just praying the cameras don't catch the silence. I slipped away, up to Camille's study. The letters were still there. Hundreds of them. I pulled one from the middle. It was addressed to me, from Camille. Inside, you deserved better. I sat on the floor, clutching it like it could still warm me. Like it could rewrite the last few days. Grief bloomed in my throat like something rotten. I opened more. Some were thank you notes for birthdays and holidays I didn't remember. Some were scrawled in Dad's crooked handwriting. Others in Mom's flowing cursive. But they all had something in common: they were never sent. One read, "Sorry we couldn't make it. We'll make it up to you." I could have choked on the irony. We always meant nothing. And then, I saw the post-its. Dozens of them, Camille's handwriting. One said, "Call returned, no answer." Another, Leora asked if they were dead. I said no. But I didn't say they cared. That's when I realized they weren't memories. They were records. Twist. Camille hadn't saved these to soothe herself. She'd saved them for me. For the day I'd need the proof. And she'd known that day would come. Another note read, "If I ever leave this world, you don't owe them your silence." I slid the stack into a tin box. I labeled it with a black Sharpie, "Silent Truths." I looked up, met my reflection in the dark monitor. No more waiting for your arrival, Mom. No more forgiving the empty. I said it out loud. No one corrected me. How many letters sit unread in your life, waiting for someone who never reads them? Later that month, I asked Camille's old friend at the courthouse, Mrs. Dane, about the youth legal camp. She smiled, handed me a flyer. Mom offered to pay the registration fee. She left a check on my desk, like a gift-wrapped apology. I tore it in half. "I'll go," I told her, "but on my own dollar." Her face stiffened. She didn't argue. That was rare. At camp, I met my mentor, a sharp-eyed woman who once clerked for Judge Mercer. She watched me argue a mock trial, then said, "Good. Truth loves self-sufficiency." Her words stayed with me. So did the feeling that Camille had been building something long before I knew I'd need it. That night, I wandered back into Camille's study. The air still smelled faintly of citrus and paper. I booted up her old laptop. The desktop looked normal, folders labeled recipes, taxes, photos. But when I double-clicked the photos folder, it opened something else. An Excel spreadsheet. Payments and promises, 2004 to 2014. Names. Dates. Bank transfers. My breath caught. I leaned closer. Column headers, from Vance Family Trust. Recipient, M&H Vance. Amounts, monthly. Steady. Like salaries. I stared, then whispered, they weren't just absent, they were being paid. Everything I thought I knew, about distance, abandonment, even neglect, shifted. It hadn't just been apathy. It had been arrangement. The house had grown quieter with time, not because noise faded, but because the silence had settled in like wallpaper. I stepped into Aunt Camille's study for the first time since she passed. The teak desk stood untouched, and the chair was still slightly pulled back, like she'd only stepped away for tea. A faint scent of buttered toast and old law books lingered, merging two halves of her life into one memory. I paused by the desk, my fingers brushing over dust that felt disrespectful to wipe away. Then I saw it, an envelope addressed in Camille's bold handwriting, Myrna and Harlan Vance, confidential. It sat beneath a paperweight shaped like a gavel. I stared. Then I opened it. Inside, a single letter, her words etched with fury and finality. "You stole more than years, you stole her voice. It wasn't meant for me." She wrote it to them. But she left it where she knew I'd find it. Have you ever found a letter meant for someone else and realized the truth wasn't yours to hide but theirs to face? I pulled the lamp closer and began reading. More letters, dozens, some from my parents, many from Camille. Most were unsent. A box labeled legal correspondence, private, was filled with thick envelopes, yellowing at the edges. One caught my eye. A letter from Dad, Harlan. Addressed to Camille. Short, stiff. I'll protect the company, but not the girl. The words hit harder than any silence ever had. I scribbled on my legal pad, the one I'd used at camp, does protection equal love, and below it, what is family if not defense? I stopped chasing their why. The ink had already answered. I kept asking why you left, but the answer was always in the words you never mailed. That kind of clarity burns. But it also cauterizes. I carried the letters into my tiny office the next morning. The winter sun spilled in through the blinds, hitting a half-empty glass of Camille's old whiskey I couldn't bring myself to pour out. It smelled like grief and strength. I spread the letters across the desk. One stood out, an unsent draft from Camille to Harlan. If you don't treat her as your child, then you will stand before the scales of justice just like any other. That wasn't anger. That was law. She hadn't planned revenge. She prepared evidence. The air felt sharper around me. I called Marley Cho, my youth camp mentor. She picked up on the second ring. You're sitting on a ton of gold, Leora, and it's called truth, she said. I stared at the papers in front of me. Not relics. Not keepsakes. Tools. They'll hear me now. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one you never heard. Are you ready to use yours? I opened my camp notebook. On the last blank page, I began drafting. Motion, integrity in unseen contracts. My hand didn't shake. Camille had always told me justice was about presence, not performance. So I clicked save. Then I hovered over the submit button. I breathed in. Then clicked. I'm not asking for acceptance, I said aloud. I'm demanding acknowledgement. I forwarded Camille's letter to Marley. Her reply came within minutes, let's shake the tree and collect the apples. That was the most Camille-like thing I'd ever heard anyone else say. The quiet had shifted. It wasn't absence anymore. It was intention. Later that night, I returned to Camille's study one last time. A drawer I hadn't noticed before, bottom right, was locked. But the key was taped underneath. Inside, a USB stick labeled Advance Payments 2005 to 2020. My breath caught. I plugged it into my laptop. Dozens of folders populated the screen. One auto-opened, Harlan_Vance_unreported_transactions.xlsx. Names. Amounts. Hidden accounts. Distributions signed off by signatures I recognized from birthday cards. This wasn't grief anymore. This was leverage. This isn't a letter, I whispered to the glowing screen. It's ammunition. The grand parlor of the Vance estate swallowed me whole as I stepped inside, the polished wood floors reflecting the afternoon light like a courtroom ready for judgment. Years of history pressed against the walls, framed in faded wallpaper and portraits with eyes that seemed to follow every step. Harlan stood rigid at the head of the room, his hands clasped like a man holding on to control, Myrna beside him with that same pressed navy suit she always wore to signal authority. Celine was nowhere to be seen, and Dustin lingered uneasily behind, like a shadow waiting to merge. The lawyer approached the podium, his hands resting on an envelope sealed with a wax crest, ornate and intimidating, the last testament of Camille Bell Esq. I watched as he lifted it, the quiet in the room stretching longer than any silence I'd known. The scent of old books mixed with spilled bourbon tickled my nose, grounding me in this inevitable reckoning. Everyone is watching me like I'm a crossword puzzle, waiting to fill in the last blank, I thought. My pulse quickened. The air was thick with anticipation. Have you ever walked into a family meeting and sensed the stakes were higher than the words spoken? The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling papers. I leave all tangible and intangible assets of this estate to my niece, Leora Vance. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Harlan's jaw tightened, Myrna pressed her lips together, trying to mask what I could read in her eyes, shock, and perhaps the first hint of fear. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, and to the individual who has kept my truth. A sealed folder was handed directly to me. Inside, a note in Camille's precise handwriting, for Leora, who stayed when others faltered. My heart pounded, thumping against my ribs like a drum signaling victory. She had never left things to the blood child. She had left them to the one who endured, the one who saw, the one who acted. Shock swelled, but beneath it, a tiny spark of power ignited. The room erupted, not in celebration, but in a fevered attempt at control. Myrna's voice cracked as she lashed out, "You manipulated Aunt Camille. You forced her hand." Her words echoed against the high ceilings, desperate and raw. Harlan jabbed a finger toward me. "This is your game, Leora," he spat, anger laced with disbelief. I stayed silent. I watched every twitch, every grimace, every calculated reaction. Then Myrna's voice cut sharper than a knife, "You're not even our daughter." I closed my eyes for a moment and remembered Camille's words whispered in kitchens and study rooms, "Truth gives you the seat they tried to take." I opened them, the gaze steady. "I didn't ask for your approval. I asked for your truth." The lawyer's gavel came down with authority, echoing like a verdict, estate transferred to Ms. Leora Vance. The shiny briefcase beside me was no longer just a case, it was a symbol. Inside, company shares, trust documents, control signed over in black and white, and my name in ink that didn't need validation from anyone else. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting at a table for crumbs of attention. I was setting the table. I was holding the gavel. "If you won't rise for me, I will stand up anyway," I thought, feeling the surge of empowerment flood every nerve. Cameras flashed as I exited the room. Reporters' voices pressed in, questions ricocheting off the walls. One voice cut through the din, "How does it feel to take it all?" I paused, the briefcase heavy in my hand, then replied quietly, deliberately, "It's not about taking. It's about being seen." I stepped into the hallway, and the oak door closed behind me with a solid click, leaving nothing but the weight of truth and the knowledge that the real trial hadn't yet begun, one that wouldn't take place in courtrooms or news headlines, but in the quiet moments where power meets resolve, when cameras are gone and only choices remain. The lawn outside the Vance estate buzzed with a restless energy, cameras flashing like strobe lights at a concert, microphones thrust forward as if to trap every heartbeat. Marley Cho walked beside me, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of reporters' questions and flashing lenses. Mom, Myrna Vance, stood at the podium, posture rigid, her statement rehearsed to the point of artifice. The banner above read "Family First, Protecting Legacy," as though family was a trademark she owned. Harlan leaned back, arms folded, eyes narrowing over the chaos, while Celine and Dustin whispered behind them, shadows lurking in the corners of their own performance. "My daughter has betrayed the only man who gave her a home," Myrna proclaimed, voice clipped and sharp, designed to sting. The words weren't just spoken, they were weaponized. I felt the weight of my name dragged across the lawn, branded and rent like a borrowed logo. I remained calm, letting the world spin around me, each flash of light and hiss of questions feeding the resolve quietly building inside. When someone in power uses your name for their performance, have you ever felt your identity was rented out? The press erupted. Camera shutters clicked violently, voices overlapped, a cacophony designed to disorient. But I stayed still. Let them scream and point. Let the storm surge. In the back of my mind, a cold clarity crystallized. This was theater, and I was the lead role they had written. Twist S5 arrived in the form of legal papers, Myrna and Harlan filing a claim accusing me of undue influence and manipulation. Rival lawyers handed out press releases like weapons. Rhea Maddox planted the first story, titled "Daughter Cheats Father Out of Legacy." I let it all wash over me. They wanted a villain. Fine. I would play the part, but I would rewrite the ending on my terms. Pressurized yet calculating, I felt the simmering power in knowing exactly where the cracks were. Back inside the estate, the war continued behind closed doors. Harlan's voice ordered Celine with surgical precision, "Make sure the narrative holds." I glimpsed Dustin counting stacks of checks while Myrna practiced crying in front of a mirror, rehearsing emotion for optics, for effect. Then Twist S11 struck like a headline to the gut, "Vance's daughter turns house against parents." The words scrolled across the screen, each letter a reminder that home was not sanctuary, it was battlefield. And yet, each arrow aimed at me carved a target sharper in my mind, an outline of purpose. Marley and I retreated to a small law camp breakout room, the press release blown up on a monitor before us. "They threw the first punch," Marley said, tone steady but fiery, "but we've got the film." "Then let's press record," I replied, heart drumming in measured defiance. We constructed our response not in panic or indignation, but strategically, legally, publicly. Camille's letter, the sealed envelope from the will, sent to Marley to start the chain, became our blueprint. The silent retaliation was more potent than any shout. When the bully uses the microphone, you don't just cover your ears. You find the mute button. Walking out into the twilight, Charleston streets aglow with the soft reflection of wet pavement, reporters swirled behind me, their lights flickering like fireflies in a storm. My phone buzzed. Marley's message appeared, "We found the ledger." My pulse surged. The briefcase from Chapter 5 felt heavier in my grip, a talisman of the justice I intended to claim. Whispering under my breath, I said the words that had been simmering, "This ends when they answer for their silence." The real battle had begun, not only in courtrooms but in the spaces where truth meets deceit, where names are wielded like weapons, and where the ones you trust may strike the hardest. I clenched the briefcase, knowing the courtroom was imminent, and that this fight would test every ounce of patience, every shred of resolve I had painstakingly forged. The shameless ones had launched the assault, but I was no longer the girl waiting for crumbs of acknowledgement. I was the storm that followed, the calculated force that would demand answers. The oak door groaned as I pushed it open, stepping into Aunt Camille's study, a room that smelled of parchment, coffee, and old resentment. Shadows stretched long across the desk, painting patterns that reminded me of the battles I'd already fought in my mind. The red folder from the will reading sat untouched, a silent sentinel to the revelations it had already contained. I set Camille's laptop on the desk, its hum awakening the echoes of her voice. "Truth travels on wires, if you'll listen." The battlefield was here, whether I was ready or not. I inhaled, letting the weight of the room settle over me, the familiar yet foreign air pressing against my skin. This was once a haven, now it was the front line. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of lamplight reminded me that the fight for justice had moved from the estate to my hands, into the realm where truth and evidence intertwine. Have you ever walked into a place once safe and realized it had become the front line? I scrolled through the folders, the click of keys punctuating the quiet. Then I found it, a file labeled Vance_payments_20052020. My pulse quickened. Twist S9, the spreadsheet revealed hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned from Harlan's accounts to a shell corporation. Each line a calculated betrayal, each transfer a silent indictment. My eyes froze on one row, L. Vance, tuition fund, $200,000, 2014. My name stared back at me, a target and a reminder. I called Marley, keeping my voice low yet steady. "It's more than money, it's motive," she said, and I understood instantly. Motive, not the crime alone, was what would unravel the narrative they had built to suppress me. I traced each transaction with my fingertip, the cold clarity of betrayal fueling a calculated fire. Every dollar moved, every entry hidden, it was a trail they thought I wouldn't follow. But I would. Beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, I heard the car pull up outside. Reflexively, I minimized the spreadsheet. Through the window, Celine's silhouette flickered, a ghost watching from the periphery. Then twist S2 struck like a phantom's warning. A courier had delivered an envelope from Camille's study. Anonymous, blank, save for 4 chilling words, "We are watching." My heart thumped, my world narrowed to the glowing screen in front of me. The walls had ears, the shadows had eyes, and yet, my resolve sharpened. I was deeper in this game than I had anticipated, but retreat was no longer an option. I spread the ledger across my desk, cross-referencing names with courthouse records, news clippings, and business filings. Dialogue whispered in my mind, truth is a weapon, they hid it in spreadsheets hoping I'd ignore formulas. Each timestamp, each transfer, each faded signature told a story of intent and deceit. I drafted a timeline: 2008 loan receipt, 2010 second transfer, 2014 sudden payoff. The narrative revealed itself not in loud accusations, but in the quiet arithmetic of truth. I sent Marley a message, ready when you are. Sometimes, the right moment is measured not by the storm outside, but by the precision of preparation. When you find the paper trail, would you make noise, or wait for the right moment? The dark office hummed around me, the laptop's light casting elongated shadows across the floor. A text buzzed on the screen, presentation tomorrow. Bring the file. I looked up at Aunt Camille's empty chair, its absence a reminder, its presence a guide. Whispering to the still air, I said, I'm bringing the file, for you, for me. The public trials were imminent, but they would start behind closed doors, in rooms where the law was practiced as both shield and sword. Tonight, the ledger was my armory, the evidence my ammunition. I leaned back, hand steady, heart racing, the hum of the laptop matching the pulse of a mission just beginning. Every page, every cell, every hidden transaction was a thread in the tapestry of justice I was about to weave. Because public trials begin behind closed doors and mine starts with a classroom of lawyers. The marble doors of the Charleston County Courthouse loomed like sentinels as I stepped inside, my heart drumming against my ribs in time with the relentless clicks of cameras. Sunlight streaked through the tall windows, illuminating polished floors and anxious faces. Mom entered first, her navy suit immaculate, tears glistening as if rehearsed, while Dad remained stoic behind her, arms crossed, the weight of authority pressing down like the carved gavel on the judge's bench. Celine and Dustin flanked them, smiles plastered on, eyes calculating every expression I made. I inhaled slowly, aware that the air itself seemed to anticipate the confrontation. Years of silent preparation collided with the present moment. The bailiff's voice sliced through the tension, Vance Estate versus Leora Vance. Every head turned, every camera lens focused. I was both defendant and spectacle, the spotlight a magnifying glass on a lifetime of waiting, of watching, of knowing the truth I had been too young to act upon. Ever walked into a place and realized you were both the defendant and the spotlight? Myrna began, her voice sharp and rehearsed. This is not my daughter's doing, it's betrayal from within. I could see Celine sliding a USB toward Carlton Ayres with the casual precision of a handoff in a heist, subtle, deliberate, lethal. Twist S6, the files on that drive could change everything. I recalled Camille's voice echoing in my mind, they'll build their version of you, then ask you to pay to live in it. My fingers grazed the edges of my folder, the ledger from the dark office illuminated by the morning light. Each entry, each transfer, a chain of deceit waiting to be exposed. Humiliation surged at first, a visceral knot of betrayal and exposure, but clarity replaced it, a cold, potent clarity that sharpened every thought, every plan, every word I would speak. The defense attorney rose, voice firm, Your Honor, we request permission to submit new evidence. Judge Albie Mercer leaned forward, peering over his glasses. Ms. Vance, are you prepared to present? I straightened, heart steady despite the adrenaline, folder in hand. "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. Twist S15, a subtle pivot, almost imperceptible, but monumental, the case transformed, the estate itself now the defendant under scrutiny. My pulse quickened as momentum shifted. No longer just surviving their machinations, I was taking command, steering the narrative with facts, figures, and the weight of truth. Rapid escalation crackled through the room, every whisper and shuffle of papers carrying the energy of revelation. Relief intertwined with focus, every muscle tensed yet controlled, ready for the next volley. The murmurs swelled as evidence began to circulate, documents referencing Harlan's Shell Corporation flashing on screens. Celine's carefully composed face betrayed a flicker of panic. I spoke softly, deliberately, words measured. Legacy isn't about ownership. It's about integrity. The statement landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. Cameras captured the moment, but my gaze remained fixed on Judge Mercer, the only arbiter whose judgment mattered. Audience interaction: when you finally hold the microphone, will you use it to be heard, or to be respected? Every eye in the courtroom was on me, yet the control, the quiet authority, radiated from within. The tide had turned, the house of false appearances creaking against the force of truth. Judge Mercer's gavel slammed down, restoring order, though I felt no relief, only readiness. Stepping into the blinding Charleston daylight, reporters surged, their questions a chorus I barely registered. One asked, "What happens now?" I clutched the briefcase that held the record of every secret, every betrayal, every ledger line that had brought us here. I held it close, a talisman of the battles won and the wars still ahead. "I'm not done yet," I said quietly, my words carrying more than defiance, they carried the promise of persistence. The courthouse receded behind me, a stage emptied but not silent. The fight for truth, for justice, for my own story, was just beginning, and I was ready to write the next chapter on my own terms. Because winning the rule of law is one thing. Winning your own story is the next battle. I walked onto the witness stand, the polish would cool beneath my palms, heart pounding yet voice steady. This was the moment I had rehearsed in my mind for years, a place where silence could no longer hold me hostage. "I'm here to tell what I couldn't say for years," I began, eyes scanning the courtroom. Mom took the stand, Myrna Vance, her carefully composed tears glimmering under the fluorescent lights, projecting grief for every camera in the room. Behind her, Dad's face remained a carved stone mask, arms crossed as though shielding himself from the truth. Celine and Dustin flanked him, silent witnesses to the theater unfolding. The lawyer for Mom produced a leather-bound journal, flipping it open with deliberate showmanship. "Is this yours, Ms. Vance?" My eyes flicked to my own typed copy, meticulously preserved, ready to counter every manipulation, every narrative they had spun over decades. What happens when someone you trusted becomes an actor on your stage? The question reverberated in my mind as I readied myself. Twist S14 emerged suddenly, sharp as a gavel. I produced Camille's old video, the one from my birthday years ago. Mom's forced smile, the way she turned away when I called for her, captured in grainy motion, yet undeniable. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, reporters scrambling, flashes flickering like lightning. I leaned forward, letting my voice carry without anger but with piercing clarity. "She told the cameras I love you, but she never came home." Mom's composure cracked, the mask slipping, and in a rare, rehearsed confession, she muttered, "I did it for the family name." Betrayal coiled around me, yet vindication surged through every word I had withheld, every silence I had endured. Twist S13 followed, subtle but potent. Mom's attorney attempted to cast me as unstable, presenting a psychological evaluation by Dr. Emery Slate. "She refuses to forgive," they argued, painting me as the one out of balance. I inhaled deeply, fingers brushing the edges of Camille's unsent letter. "You stole her voice. Don't let her steal yours." Calm descended over the courtroom, and I confronted the twisted logic: forgiveness does not erase truth. Each heartbeat synchronized with the unfolding realization that power reclaimed could not be taken. Mom trembled now, hands clutching her counsel table, Harlan's attention distracted by his phone. I spoke, measured, piercing: "You were the scriptwriter, I lived the character." Celine shuffled papers in distraction. Dustin's gaze fell away from mine, and the carefully constructed facade of our family began to crumble. Every whisper, every glance, every suppressed gesture revealed the reality beneath the surface. The mirror they offered had lied for years, now it shattered, leaving only fragments of reflection, each waiting for me to rebuild. The judge leaned in, voice firm yet deliberate: "Court will recess until tomorrow. Ms. Vance, tonight you prepare your rebuttal." I picked up my briefcase, the weight solid in my hand, containing every fact, every ledger, every secret that had brought me here. The courthouse lights burned coldly overhead as I stepped into the night air, a chill running down my spine, but clarity warmed me from within. I whispered into the darkness: "They started the show. Now I set the scene." The act of confrontation had begun, the stage was mine, and every player would follow the script I intended to write. Because in courtroom drama, the final act starts when they believe they've already won. I sat at the defense table, the folder of evidence spread in front of me, the leather edges worn from months of handling, each page a testament to years of withheld truths. My heart remained steady, but adrenaline hummed beneath the surface, a quiet insistence that I was exactly where I needed to be. Judge Albie Mercer cleared the courtroom, the hush falling deeper than any silence I had known. Lawyers shifted papers, fingers tapping, reporters leaning forward, eager to catch the first sign of emotion. My hands rested lightly on the briefcase, and I breathed deliberately, repeating the thought I had carried through every confrontation: "I'm not here to win just for me, I'm here so the voice that was silent gets heard." Have you ever held the weight of someone else's silence, and felt it turn into your own words? I did, and the responsibility sharpened every nerve in my body. The lawyer for the plaintiffs rose, poised to speak, but Judge Mercer's gavel cut through the tension. "This court finds in favor of Ms. Leora Vance." The sound reverberated through the chamber, a final punctuation on years of struggle. Twist S20 hit like a hammer, disbelief carved across Mom's face, her carefully curated composure crumbling. I exhaled slowly, letting the ledger, the letters, and the unsent truths finally find purchase. Every media camera swiveled, reporters scribbling furiously as headlines formed in real time: "Vance family empire under investigation." Satisfaction mingled with quiet power, a validation that did not shout but resonated in the marrow. Outside the courtroom, the world felt sharper, brighter. Flashes, microphones, and outstretched hands tried to pull me into their frenzy, but I remained measured. I offered a brief statement, steady and clear: this was never about revenge. It was about being seen. Mom, tear-streaked and disoriented, lingered behind, while Dad stayed stoic. Celine vanished into the shadows, and Dustin observed from a distance. Twist S24 emerged softly, signaling a new phase. The case ended, but the beginning of healing had just arrived. I stepped aside, letting the press swarm, and whispered to myself, "I'm free now, but I'm not done." Relief swept over me, gentle yet resolute, a quiet promise that my story was only beginning. I retreated to a quiet bench near the courthouse plaza, sunlight brushing my shoulders with a warmth that felt unfamiliar yet welcome. Years of waiting, of silence endured, had not been wasted. They had taught patience, not passivity. From my bag, I retrieved Aunt Camille's tin box, opening it carefully, and placed a new letter inside: "To the girl who refused to wait anymore." I closed it slowly, savoring the sense of completion, the ritual of marking an end and a beginning at once. When the storm stops, the sky is clear, but the calm is never empty. It holds space for reflection, for vision, for the next step forward. I understood that now. Walking away from the courthouse, briefcase lighter than it had ever felt, I was approached by a young law student, notebook in hand, eyes wide with curiosity. "Ms. Vance, could you tell me how you found your voice?" I smiled, feeling the shift from witness to guide, and replied simply, "I stopped hiding it." The student nodded, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of all those years seemed to lift entirely. The final mark had been made, justice was served in the courtroom, yet freedom, true freedom, was earned in life. The winter sunlight streamed weakly through the half-frosted windows of my office, catching the dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts in the quiet room. I sat behind the desk Aunt Camille had once used, her leather-bound law books stacked neatly to my left, a cup of still hot cocoa steaming at my right. Today felt heavier than any day before. The files from the Vance estate were sprawled across the desk, spreadsheets, unsent letters, legal motions, but it wasn't the paper that weighed on me. It was the realization that everything Camille had prepared, every lesson in integrity and courage, had led me here. I traced my fingers along the edges of her notes, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine her presence beside me, whispering, "Truth, Leora. Always the truth." The morning passed in a blur of calls and emails, Marley reminding me of court deadlines, my mentee notes, the testimony timelines. My mind, however, wasn't on the mechanics of law, it was on strategy, on anticipating every move my mother could make. Myrna's penchant for manipulation was predictable, but her desperation was palpable. She would strike at emotion, at perceived weakness. I clenched my fists under the desk, feeling the simmering fire of resolve. I was no longer the little girl sitting alone at her birthday cake, waiting for parents who never came. I was Leora Vance, executor of truth, and no performance would shake me now. By mid-afternoon, the courtroom loomed ahead, cold marble echoing every footstep. Reporters and cameras lined the entrance, capturing every arrival, every glare, every whispered exchange. I took a deep breath, clutching my briefcase, and thought back to Camille's lessons, patience, clarity, and precision. The door opened, and I stepped in, each heartbeat synchronized with the ticking clock above the judge's bench. There she was, Myrna Vance, poised and rehearsed, her mask of controlled grief barely concealing the panic beneath. Her eyes flicked to mine, calculating, daring me to falter. The proceedings began with the usual formalities, lawyers presenting initial motions and arguments, but I wasn't fazed. Each document I submitted, each fact I recited, landed with exactitude. The court was no longer just a stage for their theatrics, it was the arena where I reclaimed my voice. I noticed the subtle tremor in Myrna's hand as she held her notes, the slight quiver in Harlan's jaw, the almost imperceptible sideways glance Celine gave Dustin. The cracks were forming, tiny fissures that would soon become revelations. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, folder in hand, feeling a calm clarity that had taken years to cultivate. "Your Honor," I began, my voice unwavering, "these documents, letters, and ledgers are not about vengeance. They are about accountability, truth, and the acknowledgement of absence where presence was promised." The courtroom fell silent, every eye trained on me. Myrna's forced composure faltered as the truth she had tried to bury surfaced under my words. Each phrase I spoke was measured, deliberate, every pause a hammer striking the rhythm of justice. The day dragged into evening, and I felt the slow burn of triumph mingled with exhaustion. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn the session, the weight lifted slightly, but the battle was far from over. The letters, the spreadsheets, the unsent confessions, they had done their work, but the aftermath awaited. Myrna's glare followed me into the hallway, Harlan's silence was deafening, a reminder that some victories are quiet yet devastating in their precision. I stepped out into the cool Charleston night, the streetlights casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach for me. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. I felt capable. And I felt ready for whatever the next chapter of this story demanded. I placed Camille's tin box carefully in my bag, feeling the tangible weight of her legacy, and mine. As I walked past the courthouse steps, a young law student trailed, notebook in hand, eyes wide with curiosity. "Ms. Vance, how did you manage to do it?" they asked, voice trembling with awe. I smiled faintly, the corners of my mouth lifting with quiet certainty. I listened, I said simply, and I refused to stop until someone did. The night air was sharp, the city calm yet alert, and in that moment, I understood that justice wasn't just a verdict, it was the strength to carry forward the truth, no matter how long it had been buried. The sunlight spilled through the courthouse plaza, warm but not forgiving, as I stepped outside with the briefcase in my hand. The weight of years pressed against my shoulders, yet I felt lighter than I had ever imagined. Today was not about triumph over my parents, nor about proving the world wrong, it was about finally reclaiming the life that had been promised to me by someone who truly cared, Aunt Camille. Her lessons, her letters, the tiny acts of patience and courage she had instilled, had led me here, and now they lived in every careful breath I took. Reporters clustered around, microphones thrust forward, cameras snapping, but I barely registered them. I was no longer performing for approval. I glanced at the steps where Myrna and Harlan lingered, their eyes scanning me for weakness, for a crack in the armor they thought they'd seen for so many years. There was none. Only the calm, unyielding presence of a woman who had learned to stand on her own. The Vance empire, their false facade, the whispered expectations, they were shadows against the light I carried now. I found a quiet bench in the plaza and opened the tin box Camille had left behind. Each letter, each note, each unsent confession lay before me like a map of the past. I picked one, wrote a short message inside, to the girl who refused to wait anymore. I closed it gently, placing it back inside. The wind rustled, carrying with it a sense of closure, but also the knowledge that life would continue, unshackled by the past. I realized that justice had been served not only in court, but in the quiet moments where truth had been wielded as a shield and a sword. A few law students lingered nearby, whispers of curiosity and admiration on their lips. One young woman approached, notebook open, eyes wide. "Ms. Vance, how did you find the strength to stand against them?" I met her gaze, the city skyline reflected in my eyes. I stopped hiding, I replied simply. And in that simplicity lay the entirety of my journey. The storm of deceit, the torrents of betrayal, the years of silence, they had built me into someone who could not be ignored. Someone who would speak, act, and live with integrity, no matter the cost. As I walked away from the courthouse, the briefcase light in my hand, I felt a quiet triumph that needed no applause. The cameras, the reporters, even my family's lingering resentment, they were now background noise in the symphony of my life. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it belonged entirely to me. Aunt Camille's lessons, her wisdom, her unwavering faith in truth, they were no longer guides, they were wings. And I would fly, carrying her legacy, my voice, and the promise that absence and silence could never define who I was. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over Charleston's streets. I paused, looking back at the courthouse one last time, feeling the full weight and release of everything I had endured. A chapter had closed, but the story of living fully, freely, and with unwavering resolve had only just begun. And for the first time, I smiled without restraint, knowing that the future, like the law I had learned to wield, was in my hands. Every step forward was mine to claim. Every choice, mine to honor. Every silence, mine to break.